think the appeal of those David Bowie albums, for myself at least, was just they're so intricate and interesting, and you could revisit them. There was so much going on musically with the arrangements and the production, lyrically, everything about them was so enticing and seductive. All of those major classic albums from, I would say, from the 1969 David Bowie self-titled, which is also known as Space Oddity. Space Oddity is the first track on there. From The Man Who Sold the World up until this album, 1980's Scary Monsters and Super Creeps, mostly masterpieces, with some exceptions. I don't think anyone considers Pin-Ups a major classic, although that album was enormously popular in Australia, so my generation's parents and grandparents love Pin-Ups a lot, so there is that. But other than anyone of that ilk, of that era, in Australia, I don't know if anyone considers Pin-Ups a major classic. I don't know if I could consider Young Americans a major classic. I do like it, though, overall. And, Diamond Dogs is not great either, frankly, like, at all. It's C tier max, maybe. Anyway, David Bowie's albums in this time, they're extraordinary, they're so re-listenable, they're so ahead of their time, they still sound phenomenally modern. My favourite of them is Low. I used to call Low my favourite album of all time. I was just so bowled over and impressed by it. It would send me to worlds in which it would make the things I was feeling, which was relatively low at that time. A lot of it's easy to feel low when you're 17 and your major excitement in life is looking for albums on the internet to listen to. Obviously it means one doesn't have a hell of a lot going on. Also, the senior school process in certainly New South Wales is torturous and ought to be made illegal, in my opinion. Anyway, so the albums like Low and Hero, Station to Station, they were so enchanting and magical. Also Aladdin Sane, of course, and Ziggy Stardust. Hunky Dory is one of my absolute favourites. I adore that album. That's magnificent. And Scary Monsters is also an incredibly interesting album from Bowie. And it's the one which seems to sound the most seamlessly modern. It's the Bowie album which just sounds like it's, the most timeless in a way in terms of its sonic structure and the palette which it delivers to us. Obviously, albums like Hunky Dory, Ziggy Stardust, and Aladdin Sane sound very much like the early 70s. They still sound very polished and enjoyable, but they sound like if you play them, they sound like they're recordings from the early 70s. Station to Station can sound fairly modern, to be fair. Low could sound like it's from the 90s, to be fair, if you didn't know any better. Heroes sounds very modern. I think people would consider the song Heroes to have a certain timeless quality to it. Lodge is interesting. Lodge can sound very 80s, so in the context of 1979, it's ridiculously ahead of its time. That's a great album, actually. I think Lodge is kind of upstaged by the fact that Remain in Light came out the next year, like Eno's next project. There is that. And Scary Monsters. It sounds like you can analyze it and talk about it as being, ahead of the curve on, say, new romantic trends in British popular music in the early 80s. Although, how about this album is ahead of its time for Britpop, 2000s indie rock, and 2010s attempts at art pop? This is where it's at. I'd like to read out loud some notes and thoughts I was considering as I was listening to this particular album. Gotta love the intro of that cheeky Orientalism, the classic It's No Game Part 1. Gotta love Bowie's affable madness. He has some of the most fascinating pop lyrical observations from the years 1969 to 1980. Possibly the most. Gotta love the ruthless bass lines. George Murray is a genius. I mean, the bass, he was the credited bass guitarist on Station to Station, Low, Heroes, Lodger, and this. The bass guitar sounds are my favourite of all time, maybe, because the satisfaction I got from the rhythm section on these albums is ridiculous. The drum machines on Low are my favourite of all time, and apparently that's not an uncommon opinion to hear nowadays. Everyone talk the drum machines on Low being genius, according to Wikipedia, which is lovely, absolutely lovely. And of course, Robert Fripp, a Leviathan, some of the most satiating guitar lines in pop music history. And the second track, Up the Hill Backwards, is one of my favourites. Love it so much. Feels underappreciated. Pure genius Bowie. Scary Monsters song is outstanding. Ashes to Ashes. Obviously, that's a genius song. We all know that. But does it have the coolest music video ever still? Fashion is genius. Coolest guitar licks ever. Finest bass guitar work in pop. Teenage Wildlife. You you just listen to and admire the production and arrangements. It's extraordinary. Scream Like a Baby, amazing. Kingdom Come was written by Tom Verlaine of Television. It appeared on his self-titled solo album from 1979, and when you can't unhear it as a television song. The guitar in this track, though, was performed by, not Rip, Pete Townshend. Because You're Young is fairly lovely. A great end, Needs No Game Part 2. And a beautiful cycle this is. I tend to think of my favourite David Bowie album as being Low, followed very closely by Heroes, and then I would probably put maybe Hunky Dory next, and then Station to Station, and then I might have to go Aladdin Sane, but then this album is so interesting. It's such a fascinating... It's just an excellent document to just listen to all of the intricate attempts at production genius whiz going on here. It's Tony Visconti without Eno trying to whisper in his ear over the last 3 albums, so he feels more freer, I suppose, to present what an unsung genius he has been in the grand scheme of things, perhaps. I also feel as though among the David Bowie albums, it's the one which proves his... It's the apotheosis of his versatility in a way. I feel as though if there... And the finest manifestation that he was, in fact, quite a genius. Because if we take out Scary Monsters, we have a man who was jumping on the glam rock train and having Mick Ronson write songs with him for Ziggy Stardust and Aladdin Sane, in inspiration of Mark Bolan's T-Rex, no doubt. Even it's been claimed that the Hunky Dory sound was a reaction to Elton John, considering how kind of guitar-oriented he was on Man Who Sold the World, and attempted to be Syd Barrett / Bob Dylan, perhaps. And then, of course, we have him on Station to Station, which I think is a very unique era of David Bowie. Obviously, we can talk about the Blue-Eyed Soul thing being, a pastiche or an appropriation of this and that, obviously. And then Low and Heroes, Lodge of Bolin Trilogy Bowie, we can call that, it's Bowie doing krautrock rock, Bowie working with Eno, it's whatever, Iggy Pop's the idiot, this and this. But the Scary Monsters. Now this, we're not going to deny that this is Bowie at some of his most innovative and intuitive and original, his own genius at work. I wish David Bowie's albums after Scary Monsters were as interesting. Obviously, Let's Dance was, crap. Never Let Me Down was crap. And there was Tonight there as well. That's kind of crap. And there's Black Tie, White Noise, whatever that's called. That's crap. And then there's Outside, which is really good, although it's just kind of another industrial album in the 90s in a way. Had to come back. Earthling is really good. That's the best post Scary Monsters, if it weren't for maybe Black Star, actually. Obviously, Black Star was a fantastic album, sounded very modern, and as depressing as it is to listen to it, I don't play it that much, I have to admit. Maybe it would grow on me if I did. But no, Black Star is really, really strong. Next Day I really like. Hours is fine. I like Heathen, Reality, Anime Bowie. It's fine. That's where I'm at. I don't know what it was. I think when he wasn't absolutely in the moment and the hottest thing in the world, it was difficult for him to write as genius and brilliant music as he did, I suspect. I think after Let's Dance, when he just became a kind of a legacy act, and he could produce really catchy music that caught on and sounded like anyone's, or he'd just have his devoted fan base, and I think this makes for less inspired David Bowie music. Initially, he was throwing a lot. Obviously, he had capacity as a songwriter. He had a slew of work in him, in a very prime songwriter, kind of basic man in a guitar and a sheet of a notebook sort of sense, like a Syd Barrett, like a folk singer. And he had only so much of that in him for, Space Oddity, Man Who Sold the World. Then he moved to the piano for Hunky Dory, proved he had that in him. And then once he was in the spotlight, he'd been in the spotlight after Space Oddity, so I suppose he could conjure that more. Man Who Sold the World, I think maybe in some degree of a hit. Certainly Hunky Dory had changes in Life on Mars, which were enormous. And then once he was in the spotlight, he ran with it, and he was like, "What can I do? I'm going to be outrageous, Ziggy Stardust." This burst of creativity, unlike almost anything we've seen. We'd never seen anything like it in recorded music history up to that point, and few things have matched it since. What a sensation that one David Jones was born and decided to rename himself David Bowie, and the personality that he wanted to be. I guess David Jones, he felt a bit too ordinary. When he was David Jones, he was always interested in being idiosyncratic. He had long hair, and he founded the Society for Long-Haired Men to aid and defend the rights and the social, the social standing and try to remove any stigma against long-haired men in British society. And then once he became David Bowie, he wanted to be everything that he felt as though the mundane, the real world was preventing him from being. And he inspired everyone else to be the best version of themselves they could ever be. And I can't thank him enough personally. I think the feelings of empowerment and individual encouragement that Bowie inspired in myself and countless others has been absurdly inspirational. And I say absurdly because it's just, he was a pop star who would dress up and write silly lyrics and cut up and attempt to gravitate around talented people in order to get the best out of himself and others. He wanted to create these these interesting environments of which he could be inspired. And there are very, very skeptical types, very critical types who might try to pull the curtain out from in front of the wizard and claim that David Bowie's kind of a shameless chameleon and that he ought to have been more shameful. Although I just can't deny the end result of this music, and if there was a factor in bringing all of this together, and if we're going to credit producers as being genius despite not having written the music that the artists present to them, I mean, David Bowie was clearly a genius of recorded music, in my opinion. There are few more brilliant than David Bowie, at that time or at any time, and he was brilliant enough to know when one was perhaps more interesting than him, even him. He knew to gravitate toward Brian Eno, for example.